So let's take a look at board structure. This actually affects how your board works in very significant ways because it reflects your role and your purpose. So board structure is going to be outlined in a set of bylaws. It's going to indicate how your board functions and how it's structured. For committees, it's going to include the purpose, the composition, who appoints the chair, how the chair is appointed, their power and liaison, their authority, responsibility, and the reporting obligations of the committees. This is all in your bylaws and perhaps the resources and staff support as well. Well, the premise here in board structure is that form follows function. Form follows function. So typically, a board organizes its work around management functions. So for example, there might be a personnel or HR committee. That's very common. Or a finance or budget committee. Maybe in a public relations and external communications or advocacy committee or communications committee. While many board members believe that these committees are critical to providing effective oversight to management, the focus tends to be on operations, and it detracts from the board's unique functions. And I would recommend you do not duplicate staff work. If you're doing the work of management, who is doing yours? You have 4 unique functions. You set strategic direction on behalf of your community. You create a partnership with your chief executive officer. You ensure sustainable resources to achieve your organization's mission. And you monitor, evaluate, audit. So your board activities should reflect these board responsibilities. And if that were the case, the board would have these committees or some variation of them. For example, a governance committee that's going to focus on board effectiveness, on the recruitment of new board members, on board member orientation and training, and on annual assessments of board performance, and probably the evaluation of the CEO or executive committee may do that, but typically it will be a governance committee. So if you don't have a committee doing those things, who is doing them? So a governance committee becomes critical. A policy and planning committee to undertake a review of policies on a regular basis, to focus on gaps in policy, to ensure that the planning function of the board is underway. In other words, the plan to plan, if you will. So a policy and planning committee. A finance and audit committee that's going to focus on appropriate policies, procedures, and control to maintain fiscal integrity and reporting. Providing oversight of regular external audits, including perhaps in-depth examination of particular areas of interest or concern to the board. Perhaps a program monitoring and impact committee to focus on the effect of the resources that you allocate to specific programs, working with staff to evaluate outcomes and impact in different areas over time. You might also have an executive committee. Now that typically is the only committee that can make a decision on behalf of the board. It's often the liaison to the chief executive officer and looks at performance, compensation, rather than the governance committee. If you do have an executive committee, it might typically be chaired by the chair with the vice chair and then the chairs of the committees. So that committee, that executive committee, will establish board agendas as well. So these are the board committees. They're not organizational committees which report to staff. They're not management function committees. They are the board committees that reflect the board's unique responsibilities. It's important to pay attention to the board's needs, to select the chairs of committees and their members carefully, to provide clear terms of reference and objectives, and regular assessment of the committees and their structure and indeed their performance. And again, that's a task that could be undertaken by your governance committee. Now, there are different types of committees. There are standing committees. These usually address ongoing issues and a continuous flow of work. That would be typical of the four that I mentioned. Then there's the task forces or ad hoc committees. These may have a specific objective within a specific time frame, and then they're disbanded. You might also have advisory councils, for example, around particular technical issues, bringing in community members with expertise, or a community connections advisory council, or a particular client group like services to teenagers or young adults. Perhaps an advisory council around assessment of a particular program with people who have a stake in that program. These can be temporary or permanent. There's also a committee of the whole, which includes obviously the whole board, and it typically will be involved in retreats and the start of strategic planning, or around a challenging or immediate topic where everyone needs to be involved. There's also a few areas that are seldom considered. For example, does every member of your committee have to be a board member? Do they have to be on the board? You might want to invite someone who has a particular expertise or specific orientation to be on a board in order to assist with the board's, to be on a board committee to assist with the board's work. And you might want to also make sure that the number of people on a committee do not constitute a majority of the board. So for example, if you have a 9-person board, you do not want to have a committee with 5 people on it. If you have a 5-person board, you do not want a committee with 3 people on it, because they are not then a committee making recommendations, they are a majority, and you're assigning authority to them as well as responsibility. You might want to consider term limits for serving on a specific committee or as chair. It's easier to have these things written in your bylaws before they become an issue, rather than having a specific issue with an individual. You also could consider enhancing meetings of committees by using technology and making sure that performance is assessed as well. Now, some boards have one of their agreements for new board members that every board member is on at least 2 committees, unless they're chairing one. Or you may ensure that everyone agrees to be on at least 1 committee, so the ground rules are clear at the outset, and it's part of the statement of roles and responsibilities of board members. Now, when it comes to committees, minutes need to be kept. This is part of the board structure as well, of the decision made and the actions taken, not of what everyone had to say. And the committee reports to the board, only to the board. I would recommend that committee reports should be written only, and they should be in a standard format, if at all possible, limited to 1 page, 2 at the most, and they should be placed on the consent agenda unless there's a contentious issue. After all, your colleagues have examined an issue and are making a recommendation. It's likely to have been thoroughly examined, not contentious, not controversial, and can go on the consent agenda. I would also suggest, and this is not very common, that there be an annual report from each committee for the files and for successors to that committee. Again, a standard format. It might include the name of the committee, obviously, its terms of reference, who was the chair that particular year, who members were, and then what the major accomplishments were that year. What were the issues faced? What's still on the pending list? Again, only a page or 2, so that any new chair of that committee can not only see what took place in the previous year, but also perhaps over the past 5 to 10 years to see how we're growing and developing. Again, not common. Some boards have a zero-based committee structure. So every 2 or 5 years, there's a clean slate, and it forces a reconsideration. My preference is that the governance committee review committee structures and performance every 2 years, so that you've got something in place to ensure that you're doing the best possible work you can within a structure that works and addresses your unique roles and responsibilities. So you've got 4 major functions. Set the strategic direction. Make sure that there's a partnership with your chief executive officer, whatever title you give to that position. Ensure that there are sustainable resources so you can achieve your mission, and monitor and evaluate. The committees are to facilitate the work of the board. So governance, policy and planning, finance and audit, monitoring and impact need to be undertaken somewhere within your structure, and then perhaps an executive committee to coordinate the work, or some combination that works specifically for you to address your unique roles and responsibilities. As you know, you can contact me at any time with any questions or concerns or a need for a second opinion, and there are curated resources available for you on this topic. Thank you.